On this episode of Dealing the Cards, we're going to do a little bit of myth busting with some different storylines and different thought processes that people have surrounding the St. Louis Cardinals, including how good is Chaim Bloom considering his Red Sox debacle? Should the Cardinals regret some of these former Cardinals, like letting go of them that are having success in the playoffs? And who should really get the credit for the early era of John Moseliak? Was it Walt Jockety that John Moseliak had success, or is it more complicated than that? Should the Cardinals have traded for Juan Soto? We'll do all this myth busting on this episode of Dealing the Cards. Andrew, you almost got to celebrate your other team making it to the WS World Series, but now name redacted from Los Angeles is going back to Los Angeles with the Mets firepower. So, and our boy Jack Flaherty didn't look so hot. He looked like Jack Flaherty, where sometimes he's awesome and sometimes he's not. And that kind of segues right into one of the first things we want to talk about today. So I preface it off the top. We're going to do a little bit of what we're going to call quote unquote myth busting. We're going to go through some different like narratives online that you might see from fans, bloggers, whoever it is, and kind of some things that the Cardinals maybe like just some takes out the Cardinals and maybe our differing opinions, or maybe we'll agree with them. And the first one that I think is worth talking about because of the MLB playoffs is people are looking at the success of Lane Thomas and beating up on the Cardinals front office for trading him. People are looking at the season that Jack Flaherty has had, and maybe not his start last night, but the start before that as the reason the Cardinals messed up letting him go. Luke Weaver, closer for the Yankees, former Cardinal, traded for Paul Goldschmidt, and somehow some people think that was a bad move, or at least like critiquing the Cardinals for that one. Tommy Edman being traded for Eric Fetty. Andrew, I mean, you can address the whole thing or you can go through each of them individually. Do the Cardinals deserve flack for letting go of Lane Thomas, Tommy Edman, Jack Flaherty, Luke Weaver, especially because of the postseason success?
I mean, it kind of feels like every big postseason moment from a player that we haven't really heard of. Like, obviously, you have Mookie Betts hitting a bunch of homers. Lindor had a big grand slam, and like Shohei Ohtani's been doing great. But like every big moment this postseason from like a name that maybe isn't that well regarded and not like that well known among just like casual baseball fans is like a Lane Thomas or a Luke Weaver or a Jack Flaherty, where it's just like the Cardinals let this guy go. And that's kind of frustrating because, well, these aren't like that great of players, right? Like Luke Weaver was a journeyman starter / reliever, couldn't really find a role, bounced between like 6 different teams after leaving the Diamondbacks, and then finally finds a role as an all-star closer with the Yankees after who knows how many years it's been. Lane Thomas, second half with Cleveland, was not really that good. I think he was a below average bat, and then has a couple huge moments in the playoffs. And everyone's like, oh, look at this. Jack Flaherty has had 2 terrible starts. The second one, I feel like, was a little bit questionable on Roberts to start him in that role. He was sick, and I think they should have gone with the bullpen day, but whatever. He has had 2 terrible starts, but the one really good start he had against the Mets, everyone was talking about like, oh, look, the Cardinals let this guy get away too. And it just feels like a lot of these guys aren't like that valuable of players. It's kind of like the Dylan Carlson situation where he was really good for the first like 2 weeks with the Rays, and then he completely bottomed out and was Dylan Carlson again. It kind of feels like that's the kind of player the Cardinals let go. I think they deserve a little bit of flack because there are some guys they let go, like Sandy Alcantara and Zach Gallen and Randy Rosareno, who are legitimate like star caliber players. But then there's like Luke Weaver, who you got an MVP candidate, or you got an MVP for him, not an MVP candidate.
Yeah, seriously, like stop there. Like they got an MVP for him. What are we doing here?
Yeah, but whatever. I mean, would you trade Paul Goldschmidt for Luke Weaver right now? Well, yeah, of course. But yeah, I don't know.
7 years later.
It's also just that the Cardinals don't develop those guys. Like the Cardinals will never get a Lane Thomas. Like under Mo recently, they would never have gotten a Lane Thomas from a different team that panned out and did really well for them. They never would have had those kinds of guys that they trade for because they don't really make that amazing of trades, right? Like you're not gonna. Well, they also haven't really sold at trade deadlines, really, and maybe you'll see that like Thomas to JC will be really good. But the Rangers got a World Series for him. Like if he wasn't on the Rangers, they wouldn't have won the World Series. So you're not going to get much flack for that trade. Maybe Drew Rom is going to be a postseason hero one day. And
Maybe.
Orioles fans are going to be like, look what we gave. Like we haven't really gotten to the point where we can really evaluate those sellers moves.
Great point.
I don't think it's going to happen. But
Cole
if
Roby?
Drew Rom becomes an all-star closer in 5 years for the Cardinals, Orioles fans are going to be like, what did we do? We gave up Drew Rom for 2 months of Jack Flaherty, who we then relegated to the bullpen, and then he became good with the Dodgers. So I don't know. It's really complicated, and I think the Cardinals should be more to blame for not developing guys like Lane Thomas and Randy Arozarena, because they just don't. They have those guys that have more prospect pedigree and that should, in theory, be better, but they just don't pan out, and that's what's frustrating.
Yeah, it's a great point that, like, again, like Luke Weaver's a really good example of it's been 6-7 years since that trade went down, and now, well, the Yankees are seeing fruit of it. He wasn't even the organization the Cardinals traded him to, so it's like, yeah, theoretically, Drew Rom, Roby, Thomas to JC, Sem Robersa, Adam Koffenstein, like some of these Cesar Prieto, like maybe some of these guys end up becoming guys or have moments, not even become guys, but have a big moment in the future for the Cardinals or for the Las Vegas Athletics in 2033. Like, who knows? So it is too early to tell with stuff like that. When I think back to like, okay, Lane Thomas, I think it's fair to look back and say, hey, it ended up aging poorly because you got I know John Lester helped them make the playoffs, but like he did the bare minimum, and it was because the Cardinals offense was incredible for a whole month and went on a 20 or what was it, 19 game win streak. I'm always forgetting, like 17 game win streak. Like, it's not because the Cardinals got John Lester. He just was a small cog in that system, and now Lane Thomas is having success in the postseason. And
it's not even with the Nationals. That's what's annoying about this. Is it's not like the Nationals didn't get anything. Like they're not reaping the benefits of the Lane Thomas trade.
True, but I mean, I forget what they flipped him for, but maybe that ends up panning out for them. But then he did have a really good year for them 2 years ago, I believe, or last year. So like he's had success before this postseason. So like I think it's fair to look back and say, hey, it ended up being aging poorly, but it wasn't like a bad decision at the time. No one was. I can't remember anyone that was complaining that Lane Thomas and his awful play at the major league level was not worth trading. I think people are complaining about them acquiring John Lester, which because his why are they acquiring this washed up pitcher that even the Nationals don't want? But whatever. Jack Flaherty being traded, like again, even when he was pitching at peak performance at near the deadline, we were having people tell us, and I don't think you were necessarily wanting Jack Flaherty, but like I remember I was like, hey, Jack Flaherty makes a lot of sense with the way he's pitching. All these people are like, no, do not get Jack Flaherty. It'd be terrible for the clubhouse. So you can't say that and then say it was a mistake to let him go too. So like, which again, I think most people don't hold both truths at the same time. But Tommy Edman, like again, the industry for the most part agreed that the Cardinals made a good deal there and that Eric Fetty was probably more valuable than Tommy Edman at the time. Does it suck that he's performing now? Yeah, but like he wouldn't be performing the postseason right now if he was with the Cardinals. Like, so he wouldn't be having this moment. Anyway, so like, should the Cardinals be getting ripped for these?
Are you telling me that Tommy Edman wouldn't hit with runners in scoring position? Because that's actually kind of a bold statement.
I would be saying he wouldn't be hitting at all right now because the Cardinals would be sitting at home right now, so he wouldn't be able to have a postseason moment. Would it?
No, like throughout the stretch. Like he would have led them to the playoffs. You know?
Yeah, would end up finishing 6, 7, 8 games out, 6 games out. Like I don't know if he was a 6-game difference down the stretch. That seems
if you had Michael McGreevy instead of Eric Fetty, that's another like 3 wins.
Another 3 wins. Eric Fetty wasn't that bad. I don't think it's that big of a swing. But so again, I think this is just like I think people love to dunk on the Cardinals whenever they get a chance to, or some people. And again, because I think sometimes in these conversations we get a little too general. Most people listening to this probably don't care or probably aren't complaining that much, but there are people who do. So I think this is one of the myths that's just like a random one because it's relevant that we should talk about right now. But no, the Cardinals did not make a bunch of horrendous moves here. Before we get to, I think, some bigger myths and some things that people have a little bit more debates about, I do want to thank a couple sponsors of our podcast. The first one is Smith Agri Service, new sponsor of the podcast. It's a family-owned independent realtor providing farmers in Missouri, Illinois, Iowa with competitive wholesale pricing on Corteva, BASF, generic brand crop protection products, and Burvant corn and soybean seed. You can scan the QR code that's been on the episode the entire time if you want to directly text to get more information from Smith Agri Services, or you can text the number or the email that just popped up on your screen, 202-988-1106, or email smithag@irtc.net. They're a great organization to work with. I've enjoyed our interaction so far. And if you're in the ag business and looking for some new partners to buy some wholesale products from, make sure to check them out. Even just give them a text to hear some of their pricing and what they've got going on. And they'd love to give you more information. And as always, we want to thank 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles, located at 9640 Olive Boulevard in Olivet. Open 10 to 5 Monday through Friday, 94 on Saturdays. They buy, sell, and trade all sports cards and Pokemon cards, and the newest selections of packs, boxes, and single cards of local players like large Newbar signed card that Andrew just snagged, or stars around the league. Go check out 314 Sports Card in person and let them know we sent you. A bunch of you have already done that already. And again, Andrew's in there all the time. He just did some pack openings on here last time. He just went and snagged the large Newbar one. And then also, if you can't make it to 314, or you just are bored one day and want to look at some cards, go on their Instagram page. They post some deals and things they have going on. You can get yourself a Mason Win two-way card, which is actually pretty sick. Or they have, if you go to their link tree and Instagram, some ways to live bid on cards. So they'll go live, they'll pull cards, and then you'll have time to bid on it. And then the highest bid just gets the card. So check out some stuff like that they do. 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles, a great sponsor of the podcast. Thanks, 314. Okay, Andrew, something that I think, if you're a younger Cardinal fan, you probably don't think of this name very often. You probably don't talk about it very often. But if you follow the team for more than a couple of decades and you've been able to see before the John Moseliak era, you would know the name Walt Jockety very well. And there's this section of the Cardinals fan base that believes that the early success of John Moseliak, so 2008 to 2015, to a World Series win, a World Series appearance, 4 or 5 NLCS appearances, the third most wins in baseball during that stretch. I think the first or second most wins in the postseason during that stretch. I think they played in the most postseason games during that stretch. A lot of people be like, well, that was Walt Jockety's team. And Mo just rode off the coattails of Walt Jockety. He doesn't get credit for it. And the teams that quote unquote he built later on were terrible. Hey, the people who say that don't hold nose water, that's for sure. I'm here to tell you, and Andrew, you don't need to hit the button again here, that I will go out first by saying that is a myth, and that is something that just needs to be you're really creating a narrative there that I don't think is fair to anyone. Does Walt Jockety deserve credit for how the 2011 team played out? For sure, right? I mean, he oversaw the organization that acquired or that drafted Albert Pujols, right? That acquired Chris Carpenter, that acquired Adam Wainwright, that brought in Tony La Russa. There were some Dave Duncan. There's a lot of things about that club that Walt Jockety's fingerprints are on. But guess what? It's a lot of things that John Moseliak's fingerprints are on as well. Guess who was in charge of amateur scouting and drafting when Albert Pujols was drafted? John Moseliak. Yadier Molina was drafted in there at the time, right? He was a part of that same front office that made those moves. I'm also not here to tell you that John Moseliak deserves all the credit either. Jeff Lunau deserves credit. There are so many different names you could throw out there. Strom, Meadall, Gersh, Schilt from the minor league level, player development, Elas, Rodriguez, Slater, Vooch. There's just a lot of different guys that you could throw out there. I actually am missing a couple that I was thinking through earlier, so I'd have to look at where through some other names that are just, there's some really great baseball minds that were part of this whole process. And so to just take away the credit from John Moseliak for those early years and to say Moseliak's just been a terrible executive and all the good things he did was because of someone else and all the bad things he did, he needs to own, that feels like the ultimate example of cherry picking. That would be like me on the opposite, being hey, John Moseliak deserves all the credit for the beginning years, and everything that's happened recently is not just his fault. You can't blame him. The buck doesn't stop with him. That would be disingenuous, right? He owns the front end and the back end, which makes his Cardinal career a little bit complicated, but still a major success. He's still a future Cardinal Hall of Famer. It doesn't mean he shouldn't have been let go years ago at this point, but I think people are always trying to find ways to not give Mo credit for things, right? When you don't like someone, You can find any reason not to like him, and you could spin the story whatever way you want. Andrew, are you with me in thinking that this whole like Walt Jockety narrative that like Walt deserves all the credit for the things that went well and Mo deserves all the credit for things that went poorly? Do you think that's unfair like I do, or are you kind of like, hey, maybe Mo does get a little too much credit for the early years?
I mean, you look at the early years, and yeah, Mo, I guess. I mean, I'm a little young for this era. I'm going to be honest by prefacing and saying that, like, I wasn't like a conscious baseball fan for a lot of this era. Like, I knew the team and I knew the players, but I couldn't tell you what OPS was. So there you go. So I might be talking out of my foot a little bit, but it does to me seem like Mo inherited a team that had Albert Pujols and Yadier Molina and Adam Wainwright. And most GMs stepping into a new role don't really get that, right? Like most, unless you're inheriting like the Angels, you're not going to get one of the greatest players of all time just on your roster. And the Angels are a complete mess, right? It's not something that happens that often. So for Mo to lead that team to World Series, right? Like it would be like if someone right now were to take over the Dodgers, and sure,
I don't know if it's that similar.
I mean, or like a really good team. Maybe the Dodgers are a little bit because they have a way higher payroll than the Cardinals would have. But like taking over a really well-run organization like, say, the Astros, and you have these guys that are already there that maybe aren't to the level of Albert Pujols, but still like Yordan Alvarez and Kyle Tucker and whoever else on that roster that you're going to get. Like, you shouldn't really get that much credit, even if you were in development, for those guys being on the roster, right? And Mo did make some savvy trades early, bringing in like Lance Berkman or signings, and like he did get a lot of those pieces on the 2011 roster that did end up making the push all the way to the end. But like a lot of the pieces that were there, like you can say Lance Berkman was a good signing, but Albert Pujols was already there, right? Like if Albert Pujols wasn't there, then the Lance Berkman signing doesn't really matter because you're not going to make the playoffs.
Well, to push back a little bit though, like Mo was around for the bringing in Pujols, bringing in Yadi, all that, and then you go look at like 2007, the last year of Walt Jockety. It's a end of basically the past the prime. So just look at if you look at the lineup, you have Jim Edmonds, who's 37 years old, past his prime. Scott Rowland, who's 32 and is in decline. Juan Encarnacion, who's in decline. Adam Kennedy, who's in decline. David Eckstein, who's in decline. The only starters from that team in 2007 on the lineup that were still with the team, I think, are just Pujols and Yadi, because Chris Duncan wasn't with the 2011 Cardinals. Rowland wasn't. Adam Kennedy wasn't. Edmonds wasn't. Juan Encarnacion wasn't. There were some bench pieces like a Skip Schumacher that was a part of that. Then you look at the rotation, it was young Waino, which is great. And then Brandon Looper, Kip Wells, Anthony Reyes, Joel Pinheiro, Jason Isringhausen, Ryan Franklin, like all those guys are gone too by the time Mo got, or 2011 came around. So the Cardinals, I mean, Mo flipped Jim Edmonds for David Freese, which again, don't get David Freese, you don't win the 2011 World Series. Sign Lance Berkman. You talk about the teams after when they lost Albert Pujols. He signed Carlos Beltran, and Carlos Beltran was insane for the Cardinals those few years. He acquired developed a Jaime Garcia, acquired Edwin Jack. He did the Colby Rasmus trade, which is super bold at the time, to take like a young emerging star and bring him into a bunch of smaller pieces and won them a World Series. Brought in Jake Westbrook, brought in Kyle Loesch, who was a huge part of that team, Jason Mott. I think there's this misconception, and I'm not saying you were like pumping this, but like that it's just Walt Jockety's team. I'm like, you look at that team, and a lot of the players that were with the 2004 Cardinals, the 2006 Cardinals weren't there anymore. Yes, you did have two Hall of Famers, two Hall of Famers, and one that won't make it, Adam Wainwright, but is as Hall of very good. Sure, those are pillars, but like pretty much everything else was a different team by the time the Cardinals won in 2011. And then definitely you look at 2013, Matt Carpenter, Alan Craig, like there's just a very different team, right? So I just think that people underrate how much roster turnover there was there. And also it was 4 years later, like no organization's the exact same. Even if Mo just wanted to keep things the same, things deteriorate, right? Like look at the Cardinals now, and they just try to keep doing things the same way. They kind of fell apart. Like they got innovative. with like a Jeff Luna. I think Cody brings up a really good point of if Mo left in 2020, how different would these talks be? And I think they would be vastly different. Like things would have been in decline, but like I think he would have gotten out quick enough that like he wouldn't have had to own all of it. Anyways, sorry, I had to jump in there because I feel like you're right. Pujols, Yachty, Carpenter, I forgot about him too. Chris Carpenter and Adam Wainwright, huge part of 2011. Wait, actually, but 2011, Adam Wainwright was hurt the whole year.
Yeah, he wasn't on that team.
So like he was on it, but he didn't even pitch. So like you can't even add Adam Wainwright to that mix either.
I understand it. I'll give Mo credit. You can push the button if you want. And like he did a good job like for the early days. I just don't know like if it's I don't know if he deserves as much credit as you're giving him because like how many teams can you think of with 2 Hall of Famers that are like bad? I can think of like one in recent memory.
It's
just not like there's just not enough out there, right? Like unless like the one team that everyone talks about that has 2 Hall of Famers is the Angels, and everyone's like, "Oh, look at these guys!" Like it's like a joke at this point that they can't win with all of the talent that they've had. Like
well,
I don't think it's like that difficult to build a team around Albert Pujols and Yadier Molina because they provide so much that it's not really like the supplemental pieces don't have to be as good.
yes, but like most like so to say how many teams with 2 Hall of Famers just miss the playoffs every single year, that list is small. But how many teams that had multiple Hall of Famers that don't win a World Series, that list is probably a lot bigger than the
Well,
ones
yeah,
that actually pulled off. And the Cardinals pulled it off in 2011 with a different core than there was there in 2006, 2004. And then you also look at 2013, they didn't have Albert Pujols. They let him walk. What a bold move to let a top 10 player in all of baseball walk. And they somehow made 3 more NLCS and made a World Series the consecutive years. Like, I think that
was that
also
Mo's
shows.
decision to let him walk, or was that the DeWitt's?
I mean, that's probably you probably can't say one or the other. Like,
Because I
at
don't
the end,
know if that's necessarily like. I think Mo probably would have kept him if he had the money
I'm
to.
not even saying like give Mo credit for letting Pujols walk. I mean, that 2012 team would have been better with Albert Pujols.
Yeah,
And then also like I don't know, 2013 and 14, 15 could have been a really like Pujols could have been a different player if he stayed in St. Louis. That's a DeWitt thing over a Mo thing. But my point is like Mo won the World Series 2011, lost Tony La Russa as his manager, lost the greatest player of the 2000s, and they went to the World Series 2 years later. They made the NLCS the year they lost both of those guys. They made the NLCS the year after they made the World Series and lost in it. Like, and you look at that team, and it's like, especially once you get to 2014 and 13, it's led by Alan Craig, Matt Carpenter, Carlos Beltran, um, Shelby Miller, Carlos Martinez, Michael Wacha, like all these different guys that like Michael Wacha was from the Albert Pujols. Well, letting go of Albert Pujols, they drafted Michael Wacha. He ends up being 2013 NLCS MVP. Like, I just think like I agree with you. Walt Jockety deserves credit for some of those things, but the people who say Mo does not like that was when you say like simply the same that was Walt Jockety's team, I think is so untrue. It was John Moseliak's team, but Walt Jockety played an influence on it for sure. Like you cannot understate the fact that he built some of that stuff. But then like if Mo just played with Walt Jockety's team, then 40-year-old Jim Edmonds would have been around in 2011, not David Freese, right? Like Scott Rowland would have been around. There would just been a lot different. So
and that's what Mo would have done if he was current Mo.
today, yeah, he probably
Yeah,
would have.
Jim really wanted to be here. He got a text from me, and I said, I really wanted you to be here too. Anyway.
Oh my gosh, I'm dying. Well, I feel like this might end up being a controversial episode, especially because of the third one. So again, actually, and you can blame me. I chose the rundown here, Andrew. Andrew, you definitely influenced the first one, but don't get mad at Andrew for this next question that I want to ask. So, Andrew, is it a myth or truth that the Cardinals should have traded for Juan Soto in 2022? We're just gonna keep coming back to this one. I'm just gonna let you have the floor first. I'm not gonna give any of my thoughts because I have some thoughts.
I don't know. This one's really hard for me because I think it's we might have some we should just call this one philosophical differences with whatever you're like, because I really don't know.
Yeah.
That was the best Cardinals team that we've had maybe since like 2011, maybe. I don't know.
Well, 2013, that team was insane.
That team was good.
In 2014 or 2012, I think they won 100 games.
No, they only won 100 games in 2015. That was their only.
Or sorry, 15.
But that team, I don't think that team was that good. It was just like a really pitching heavy team. The best player on that team by B-War is Jason Hayward.
Yeah, I just and like I think like 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, those are like really good teams.
Yeah,
2015
like really good teams,
though.
but I think the 2022 team is better than all of those, right? And
2013, I'd give more because they also had elite pitching. Like this 2022 team did not have elite pitching.
But that lineup from top to bottom was one of the better ones. Like you had Brendan Donovan as the best season of his career leading off. You had Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, and Albert Pujols all having career years. Like Pujols.
Well, almost. Yeah,
I
know. Yeah, I know.
Basically, like it's not the best year of his career, but like it's the best year of his last like 12 years. And then you had some supplemental pieces as well. Lars Nootbaar was finding his own. He was really good. Tyler O'Neill was like okay. Dylan Carlson was still okay. And like it just and Yadier Molina was like not a good bat, but like defensively was still like better than you're going to get out of most catchers. And it was just like it was a really well built team that had like a lot of magic going. You had lockdown closer, which didn't work out for you, but whatever. And I feel like that might have been the year to go all in on Juan Soto. And you look at that, you decimate your farm system. You probably have to give up Jordan Walker. You probably have to give up Mason Wynn and then Tink Hence and who knows what other pieces you have to give up. Carlson, obviously, part of that trade. But you look at the pieces that you end up giving, like let's say they gave up Hence, Walker, Wynn, Liberatore, and Carlson, right? How many of those pieces are you really missing right now? Just Mason Wynn?
Wait, can you name those pieces again?
Hence, Wynn, Walker, Liberatore, and Carlson.
I think you probably have to give up even more. But yeah, that's the majority of it. You're probably losing a Gorman.
Well, the Padres also got Josh Bell in that trade, if you remember.
Yeah, but
I don't think having a really good season up until he fell off.
Yeah, but like Liberatore does not come close to Mackenzie Gore.
Yeah, but Hence and Liberatore probably does.
Maybe, but like at that time, Hence wasn't viewed that way. Hence was like an interesting prospect, but he wasn't like top. He isn't what he even is now. And even now,
you also give up Nolan Gorman.
Yeah, right? So that's what I'm saying. You're not super, but I think it's
how many of those pieces are you missing right now? Maybe Hence and Mason Wynn, and that's it.
You're not missing Jordan Walker at all.
Not really. I don't know. Like he hasn't given you like the thing is you probably go into a rebuild either way because you're in a rebuild now. And if you had Soto and your team falls apart in 23, which who knows, maybe Juan Soto would have carried the team to be at least like not like a horrible team in 2023, right? Like maybe you don't lose 91 games. Maybe you'll only lose like 82, right? Maybe you're like an 80 and 82 win team with Juan Soto in 2023. And that's a team that might have bought at the trade deadline. Maybe you add the pitching you need to actually be good enough. And you have Nolan Gorman striking out like Chris Davis in Washington. And you're like, oh, I guess we don't really care. And you have Dylan Carlson just completely bottom out in Washington. And it's like, oh, I don't really care. And Mason Wynn's great, but you got to give up some value to get Juan Soto, right? And the reason I wouldn't have done this trade like at the start of the season, but now looking back on it, that the rebuild was coming, and I was trying to, because the narrative that the ownership keeps pushing is the Cardinals never rebuild, and obviously that's not true anymore, right? So like looking at a team that like people were trying to convince me on a rebuild last offseason, and I was like, the Cardinals don't rebuild. That's just not their style. Like they're going to find a way to patch it together, maybe even spend a little bit more to get it done. But if I had known that the ownership wasn't willing to do that and rebuilding was on the table either way, then the Juan Soto deal doesn't look all that bad. And look at what the Padres got back for Juan Soto. They got
Yeah.
Michael King, who's a legit top of the rotation starting pitcher. And they got some other intriguing pieces as well that they used to flip for Dylan Cease.
Yeah.
Right. So they built the front line of their rotation. Like, I'm not saying the Cardinals would necessarily do that. I don't think that's as aggressive of a move. I'm not saying they would end up with Dylan Cease and Michael King if they had gotten Juan Soto, but that ends up looking a lot better than just letting him walk for nothing. And I don't know, like, is this team a lot worse without Jordan Walker and without Mason Wynn, but you have Michael King and then some other prospects that you could have flipped to get another frontline rotation arm? I don't know. And you have a run in 2022 where, I mean, Helsley blew up in the ninth inning, but if you had Juan Soto on that team, maybe Arenado and Goldie, even if they weren't performing as well as they did, Juan Soto gives you that big hit in game 2. Because remember, there were a lot of runners in scoring position for Goldie and Arenado. And if you have Juan Soto there who has elite plate discipline, even if he doesn't give you a hit, if he draws a walk, if he does anything but like strike out like Goldie did in some of those positions, you're going to a game 3 against Ranger Suarez, who wasn't 2024 Ranger Suarez. He was a lot more of an unproven arm. And then you never know what happens, right? Think about that team. And people will say, like, okay, if they got Juan Soto, they're not going to upgrade the rotation. Look what they gave up to get those Montgomery and Quintana. They gave up Johan Oviedo, and they gave up Harrison Bader, neither of which would have been in the package for Juan Soto. So
Yeah.
It's really tough. I don't think it's a one-sided. I don't think it's a myth that the Cardinals should have traded for Juan Soto. I think there's a lot more to unpack.
To your point, if you look at 2022 in the playoffs, how Juan Soto played, so it's like, okay, let's just. I mean, doesn't mean he'll play.
He had a really good postseason, didn't he?
The wild card series was okay. He batted 333, 385, 333. It's like a 718 OPS.
Better
but again,
than
he was
zero.
Yeah, no, you're getting hits with him, and so in those spots, if he's getting singles, like that potentially wins you games. The NLDS against the Dodgers was pretty bad. He had a 485 OPS, but then he was really good in the NLCS. He had 2 home runs, 1 double. They only played 5 games, but he had a 222 average, but he had a 944 OPS. So like Juan Soto was pretty good in those playoffs. Here's where I will agree. And
here's the thing. Another thing. If you had Juan Soto, do you not contend for a bye that year? I don't remember how competitive the other 2 teams were.
Let me see if I can figure out real quick the 2022 NL standings. I don't think you're super far off, but I don't know if it makes that much of a difference, but potentially. Because the Cardinals played really well in the second half. Oh yeah, there's no way. They're 8 games behind the Braves. Cardinals won 93 games. The Braves won 101. The Dodgers won 111
games. That's okay.
But to your point, so here's where I'll say, like, the more that time has gone on, the more, especially because where the Cardinals are at today, it is not like I used to think it was like. I mean, in the moment, I wanted Juan Soto. I for sure wanted him, but that's because kind of the reporting out there, thanks John Morosi, was that Dylan Carlson was holding up the package. Then stuff came out, and you saw what the Padres gave up, which was a historic package. I mean, look at the Nationals are about to be a playoff first key contender next year because of all this young talent they got from them. And then, so you saw that, and then you saw the reporting of what the Nationals are asking for. Then I was like, totally out. Doesn't make sense because they just have way too much talent to give up if you're not going to bring back Juan Soto. But to your point, we will never know how 22 could have gone. They could have lost in the wild card series too. But again, you had Juan Soto, and your lineup has freaking Brendan Donovan. Trying to think who bat. I mean, maybe you. Oh yeah, you probably do.
I think it was
probably do Donovan,
but it would be Donovan, Goldie,
Juan Soto,
Pujols,
Arenado, Pujols, or something in that stomach order with freaking large Newbar batting behind them.
Yeah,
yeah, that's. I mean, like how that's tough look.
You have Juan Yepes and
yeah. So, like, I see the argument for sure. I do think I disagree a little bit with you that you wouldn't be in a worse position right now because you right now you're rebuilding, quote unquote resetting, but you are rebuilding with Jordan Walker, Mason Wynn, Tink Hence, Matthew Liberatore, okay, a little bit. But you're rebuilding with all these extra pieces that you wouldn't have anymore. To your point, you could have done what the
You get
Padres
Michael
did.
King in the process.
Well, yes, you could have done what the Padres did and you flip him. I think you're in a worse position right now. But is the worst position you're in right now worth the risk of going all in 2022? I think you're it might have been. I don't know. I kind of,
if the organization was as inept and as like not spending on player development and like, oh, our whole farm system is messed up in 2022, then 100%. But I guess we didn't really know that at the time.
and then it's also hard because it's like, well, they don't want to sign Wilson Contreras, so they got Juan Soto. They just don't, because you would have added a $30 million arbitration player to your payroll that next year. So like, I don't know what kind of moves they would have made after this. I think 2022, you're right, would have been the year, but then 2023, I think would have went the exact same way. They would have fallen off again. Probably trade Juan Soto this offseason. They'd probably enter the rebuild a little bit quicker, so maybe that's a good thing. Anyways, here's my zag from it, is I could say, as we've gotten further away from the trade and as the Cardinals have continued to underachieve, then it makes that trade, not doing that trade, make a little bit worse in some ways. What I would say is in my opinion, that's the wrong thing to be mad about that they didn't do. The thing that you should be mad about is how they've misspent money in other ways and not gone after certain other players. They could have traded Harrison Bader and a couple other pieces for Zach Wheeler. They didn't do it. They could have been one of the teams that went after Bryce Harper on an amazing deal. They didn't do it, right? Like, there's moves like that I think and Max Scherzer wanted to come to St. Louis. They didn't sign him. Those are the moves that I'm more upset about, because it just was way easier, moved a way easier pill to swallow than what the Juan Soto deal was going to take. And so that's where I think fans should be more upset about those things than the Juan Soto thing. I'm not saying you can't be upset about it. And I used to be very much on the like, shut up, like, people stop being mad about the Juan Soto thing. It's ridiculous. I still think it's ridiculous if people hold on to the Dylan Carlson thing. I will not give up that take. But yes, it has aged poorly. Maybe they should have done it. Hey, maybe we should get to the title of the video though. Oh, the Chaim Bloom side of things. Is Chaim Bloom actually good? Andrew, myth. Chaim Bloom's bad, or do you think it's a myth, or do you think it's fact that Chaim Bloom is not as good as we think he is because of how the Boston situation went?
I love Chaim Bloom. He traded Mookie Betts to the Dodgers, and this is great. Like, this is so much fun.
And we're gonna love him because he's gonna trade Nolan Arenado to the Dodgers.
No, well, I don't know if I want to keep watching him, but yeah, we'll see. Chaim Bloom, yeah, he's great. The Mookie Betts trade, he gave him up for basically nothing, and that's tough. But imagine if the DeWitts told the entire world that they were going to trade a player. Imagine what they would get back. Probably Nick Robertson. Like probably nothing of any value. And
that's a great point.
So I don't really think that's that big of a deal. So, yeah, Chaim Bloom revamped Boston's farm system. They have one of the best farm systems in all of baseball. I don't know if I'm necessarily qualified to talk about all of those names, but you can go look on Top 100 MLB and look at Boston's pitching for this year. You come in with a rotation that doesn't have a lot of names. You lose Chris Sale. And I think there's a couple all-stars on that roster. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they had one of the better rotations in all of baseball this year. And yeah, I mean, that's all Chaim Bloom, right? He picked some of those guys. He's great with pitching, developed some of the Rays philosophies that they continue to use today, right? Like, he fleeced the Cardinals for Randy Arozarena. So if you think that was a bad trade on the Cardinals side, think about who was making that trade on the Rays side.
Can I jump in real quick? I think that's something that we're not thinking enough about with the future. What the Cardinals are doing is that, like, there's something you talked about earlier where I was like, that's true if the front office is still the same. And it's kind of the same this next year, but like 2024 and beyond, or 2026 and beyond, like, Cardinals have brand new leadership in place, and there's probably be a lot.
Oh yeah, it was the thing about like the making poor trades and like trading Lane Thomas, but now they might be on the other end.
They could be on the other
end of that.
We don't know, but right now we have to assume with John Moseliak's leadership that things are not going to go as well as we want them to. Chaim Bloom, you never know. Like, there's a track record of him being the guy that fleeces the other team. So like, that's a fun thing to talk about.
And it's not like Mo hasn't. I mean, I don't even want to talk about Goldschmidt and Arenado anymore, but yeah, he got very
Jordan
lucky,
Montgomery,
I
Harrison
guess.
Bader.
Yeah, we all thought he fleeced the White Sox for Eric Fetty, but now everyone's talking about like, oh, the Dodgers got Michael Kopech and Tommy Edman, and all they gave up was Miguel Vargas and two prospects nobody's heard of. And it's like, okay, well.
Well, yeah, even at the moment, there was an argument that the Dodgers were the true winners of that deal because they just kind of jumped in and were like, "Hey, we'll take Tommy
Yeah.
Edman."
No, the
But
White Sox were willing to do Fetty for Edman straight up, and that trade would have looked a lot better because Edman wouldn't be in the playoffs right now.
yeah,
And
the Cardinals are still a winner in that trade. I think it's just the Dodgers are the biggest winner because they came in and just got Edman for Vargas, basically. But the White Sox are the huge losers here, where it's like, what were you doing?
I mean, Eric Fetty is not that big of a name.
But like again, I mean, he was fine down the stretch of the Cardinals, and then assuming you either paying him $7.5 million next year to be a number 3 starter, which is a great bargain, or you're flipping him this offseason for something. And Tommy Edman, like if you're trading Tommy Edman this offseason, you're not getting a ton for him.
Yeah.
So
yes, I mean, you know what actually bothers me though is that Tarek Skubal didn't get traded at that deadline, and now Mo and the DeWitts are going to be like, oh, look at the Tigers. Remember the Tigers? They sold the trade deadline and they made the playoffs.
yeah, tough. Again, we've talked about Bloom a lot. I think Bloom's awesome. I think he gets too much crap for how Boston went. Cardinals, for as frustrating as the transition plan feels, have done a lot to set him up for success long term. Again, he got a year audit the organization. How many presidents of baseball operations get to see their organization for an entire year before jumping into that role coming from the outside? How many of them also get a whole other year to revamp player development before they call the shots? Like I think he's being set up for success here. And again, I don't think all Pobos need that, but with his temperament, his skill set, it's great to set him up in that way. Dave Dombrowski doesn't need to do that, right? He just comes in, he lets things fly. But like Chaim Bloom, especially where the Cardinals are at, I think this is a much better fit for him than Boston was. So, last but not least, because we're kind of getting to the end of this, and it's been pretty long so far, but I think this could be a kind of a fun conversation. Also, I real quick back to that Juan Soto thing. I know we're going all over the place here, but the 2013 team, I would say, is still better. So, I'll disagree that the 2022 team is the best team since 2011 because the 2013 team was as good of a lineup talent wise, but also was historically good with runners in scoring position, which was insane. But then also they had elite pitching because they had Waino healthy, Shelby Miller, Lance Lynn, Carlos Martinez, Michael Wacha, Trevor Rosenthal. Like that pitching was insane compared to what the 2022 Cardinals was. But to your point, I do think the 22 Cardinals could have had a really cool run there, and arguably is the most talented team since 2013. Especially if you got Juan Soto. Then I wasn't even counting Juan Soto into this conversation. So if you add Juan Soto, it might be more talented than 2013 was, but that's hard to say.
Yes, the greatest hitter of all time with runners in scoring position was available this offseason for $2 million a year, and the Cardinals didn't do it.
So Andrew's been kicked off the podcast for the next. Oh gosh, we're not doing the Ohtani thing.
17 for his last 21 with runners in scoring position.
Yeah. Hey, Ohtani is great. Okay, last thing. Myth or fact, Cardinals are bad because they don't spend enough money. So again, it's not that simple, but there's a lot of people who
yes,
are like,
actually.
anyways, there's a lot of people who get frustrated the Cardinals payroll is where it's at, wish it would go up. And then the main thing they're going to talk about this offseason is they cut payroll. And it's like, I think it's a part of the problem. It is a piece of the pie, but it is much smaller than the fact that they spend money poorly elsewhere, right? Like, who cares if they spend 180 million when the freaking Cleveland Guardians are going toe to toe with the New York Yankees right now on $100 million payroll?
Are
right?
they going toe to toe though?
Okay,
they should have gotten swept. Like, let's be honest.
But my point is, if the Cardinals spent 180 million but spent it better than they did, they would be a better team. Like, the point isn't that the Cardinals don't spend 300 million, it's that they don't spend the 180 well, right? Like, Miles Michaels' contract's bad. The Steven Matz contract, not great. Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson were band-aids because you can't develop your own internal pitching. That's like 50 something million dollars right there that you didn't have to wait, 18. Yeah, it's like 50 something million right there that you could have spent better, but you had to Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson were decent players this year, but you had to go sign players like that because you didn't have the internal pitching. Miles Michaelis, I don't know how to explain that contract. Again, the Steven Matz, that hasn't worked out. You go back to the Andrew Millers of the world, the Brett Cecils of the world, the second Matt Carpenter extension. Like, there's just been a lot of weird money spent. And that to me, and then also the whole not investing in player development, that is the reason the Cardinals have not been successful, not because they're not spending an extra 20 million. Because Andrew, do you trust John Moseliak to spend an extra 20 million? Like if John Moseliak was given an extra $20 million to spend next offseason, do you think that it goes that much better?
Well, if he had been given
okay, not okay.
Million,
outside of signing Ohtani.
No. I'm saying like you could have gotten like Glass now.
Yeah, fair.
Or you could have gotten Imanaga or Yamamoto.
Okay, so but we've had this conversation. Do you think Glass now makes this team that much better right now?
Not right now. Like
that's my point.
Okay, I think
just
probably would have won you the extra games to get into the playoffs, but he wouldn't be available right now, and the Cardinals got unbalanced.
Okay, so then do you think fans are excited? Sorry, I'm not debating you. I'm just like using his point. Like, do you think fans are satisfied with the season right now if they just barely made the playoffs and got bounced round one?
No, but they could have also signed like a bat. Who was a good bat that was available last offseason?
Yeah. But I mean, but they also
that one, but
they could have done that stuff too if they just didn't freaking re-sign Miles Michaelis. Like,
well, yeah, but
oh,
did you mute me? Oh
no.
I understand that. I don't know what happened. Like they've spent poorly, but you look at the 4 teams that are in the CS right now. The Cleveland has not been competitive in the CS. Let's be honest, right? Like. They had a miracle comeback in game 3. And then like it just hasn't been like that competitive against the Yankees. And the Yankees have played really sloppy baseball. But you look at the 3 other teams, the Dodgers, the Mets, and the Yankees. I think they're like 3 of the top 4 or 5 teams in payroll. I think the only other team that's up there is like the Phillies, who were supposed to be a favorite, but got bounced by the Mets, who had a higher payroll. And like those teams win big, and I don't know if the Cardinals would need to spend that much more. But if they had the extra 20 million this year to spend on a bat, you don't really need Miles Michaelis. And even if they had the extra 20 million, they wouldn't be approaching the luxury tax. They still would not be top 10 in payroll. And that might have been good, right? Like you add another. Okay, let's say they signed Teoscar Hernandez, right?
True. I guess I'm not disagreeing.
Think about how much better they would have been. Do you think Teoscar Hernandez could have gotten them to the playoffs? For sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm not saying they shouldn't spend more money. That's not the point of it. I'm just saying like the overall issues are more the misuse of capital rather than the lack of capital.
Yeah.
And so that's more of my like is the like when people just like when that's the number one argument people use, I'm like, you're missing the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is they're not spending the money correctly, which I think they'd agree with, but I'm like, that's the thing I'm more upset about is like, I don't care if you spend well, do we want them to spend 200 million and not make the playoffs? Like, does that make us feel better? Like, if they spent 200 million and didn't make the playoffs, no one would care. Like, payroll wouldn't matter. Like,
I mean, it'd be a more exciting product, probably,
but like the Mets last year spent like almost $400 million, or not really, it was like 350 million, and like they were terrible. Now, again, they made it this year, but like, I'm just saying, like, I don't think payroll, the number is the thing that people should be hung up on. I agree, though. I'm not trying to say that it's not a problem. It is. I just think it's not as big of an issue as the misuse of money. So I think we mostly agree there. I just think it's not like I'm not going to sit down and be like, you know what's wrong with the Cardinals? They don't spend enough money. I'm going to be like, part of it, not the major problem. So anything else you'd add to the myths?
I mean, I think they should. The rebuild is a lie. That they need to rebuild.
Oh, wait. Oh,
It's not a myth, but I'm just saying, like, the not spending enough money thing. It's like the rebuild is a bit of a lie.
Yeah.
Especially now that you got FanDuel Sports and your TV deal's not up in the air anymore.
Hey, maybe that's what we talk about Wednesday or when I'm gone the week after. You guys can be like, hey, talk about the path for contention in 2025 instead of rebuilding it all. But that's our myth busting for today. We'd love to hear if you're listening later. Comment down below. Let us know your thoughts. Again, we are not trying to tell you have to think this way. This is just our perspectives, and we love the conversation and dialogue. Again, the Juan Soto thing. It's one that I've kind of changed my opinion on a little bit. I still don't think they should have done it, but like I'm way less standing on the hill than I was before. It's fun to have these conversations and to continue to have the dialogue. But again, thanks for checking out this episode today. Like and subscribe helps the channel a ton. We'll be back again on Wednesday. And yeah, we're excited for, and I guess we'll have another Birds on the Farm this week too. So fun stuff coming. So thanks for checking out Deal on the Cards. We'll see you next time. Peace.